Now there's one last feature related to break and continue, which I will be honest, you will very, very, very rarely need or use, but I still want to show it to you because it's part of JavaScript and you should learn it in this course, of course. And that's the so-called labeled statement. So let's say in this while loop, but again, this works in any loop, we have a nested loop. So we're logging j here, and then I have a for loop in there where I initialize, let's say, k to be 0. We could theoretically use I in here, and it would create a new I detached from this I for this loop, but to avoid naming confusion, I'll use k in here. And k is maybe smaller than 5, that's our exit condition, and we increment k, and then I console log k here. So far that's nothing too fancy. We have a loop in a loop. If we now save that and we reload and we press log, maybe without doing anything before, we print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's our nested loop in this outer loop. Now one tiny change, I'll set j to 0 here so that we run this outer loop more than once as well. So let me save that, reload, click show log. And now we have a lot of output here, and we get that 0 here. Maybe to make it clearer what's coming from where, we can add outer as an identifier here, and here inner. So I'll console log two things, an identifier and then the actual value, so that we can see which value is coming from where. And now we see we have the outer 0, then this inner loop completes, then the outer loop moves on to the next iteration, its second iteration, therefore we have a 1 there. We have a new inner loop starting at 0 again, all the way up to 4, a new outer loop iteration, a new inner loop, and so on. Now let's say you have some code, and typically of course you would not just be working with some numbers here, but you have some application, some other logic where you have some condition in your inner loop that should actually finish the outer loop. So for example here we could say if k is equal to 3, then that is a reason for us to stop the entire loop execution. Now, of course, we can do that with break, but what will actually happen here is that we just stop the inner loop, because as I mentioned, break will stop the nearest loop, so to say, the loop to which it belongs. So if I now reload here and we execute this code with show log, you see outer actually continues to work. We have outer 0, outer 1, and outer 2. And just the inner loop always stops after 2 because we break after a value of 3, or when k reaches a value of 3. Now what if we want to break the outer loop though? Well, you can do that with a so-called labeled statement. And that's really something, as I said, which you will rarely see and use in JavaScript. You can assign a name to this loop, and that again works on any loop. Actually, not just loops, you can assign it to any expression, but it really only makes sense on loops. You could name this outer while, so any name of your choice, and then you add a colon and then a white space. And now this is a name for the loop in front of which you added this. And you can add this, as I said, in front of any expression, but you typically do it in front of loops, because there you can use that because that is meant to be used with break and continue. You can also, but you don't have to, add this here in front of that for and maybe name it inner for. And now here you can use break like this to finish the inner loop, but if you want to finish the outer loop, now you can say break and then pass the name of the label you assigned to your outer loop. So in this case, outer while. And now this allows you to break a different loop than you're currently in. So now if we do that here, and I click show log, you see outer now actually finishes when inner reaches a value of 3, and we have no other outer logs. And you can do this not just from inside loops, but from anywhere in your code. So if you have an infinite loop running in one part of your code, and then you have another part in your code where you kind of react to a button click and that should stop that infinite loop, well, then you could also work with labeled statements and call break in one part of your code in your event listener to stop another loop where you assigned a label like this. So these are labeled statements and how you can use them. And you can not just use that with break, but if I comment this out, you can also use it with continue. Works in exactly the same way, just with the continue functionality, where we don't stop the loop, but only the current execution. And therefore here, in this case, we just continue with our outer loop. Though now I actually created an infinite loop here. So you will need to close that browser window here in this place. And I did create an infinite loop here because by continuing with the outer while, well, we never reach this J++ code here, right? We execute this outer loop, then we start with this inner loop right away. There, whenever we reach K, which we always will at some point of time, we continue with the outer loop. And therefore, this J++ part, which is important for our exit condition, will never run. So this actually is dangerous because we create an infinite loop here, as you just saw. So you should always watch out what you're doing with continue if you accidentally maybe create an infinite loop, which you probably don't want to do. So that's one thing. The key thing here are the label statements, though. The labels you assign here to your loops, which you can then use with break and continue. Again, nice to know, nice to understand if you encounter it in some examples or in an interview, but really a feature which you will rarely need, as you will see as you work with JavaScript. This is something that comes with experience, but there you will see that you really don't have a lot of occasions where you would need this. Still, since it's a part of the language, I didn't want to hide it from you.